Hi, I'm Bob, and yes, it's another Ghostbusters episode. Don't like it? Help make something else popular on YouTube. Please, because I do this for a living, and right now it's Ghostbusters or pretend to be frightened by Hipster Night Trap. In just a few days, we'll finally find out whether the new Ghostbusters is any good or not. My prediction, I got no fucking idea how it's gonna go, but I will say the deck is kinda stacked against it. The whole problem with remakes is that you're always gonna be compared to the original, and that's why you generally don't remake classic movies. No matter how good you make it, it's always gonna suffer in that comparison. And when you've already got an army of assholes looking to pounce on every flaw, I mean, this pretty much has to be as good or better than the original to shut the haters up, and that ain't gonna happen. The fact is, the idea that the worst humans on the internet have turned Ghostbusters into the latest target of their bile has become a big part of the story of the film's release, so much so that Sony and the filmmakers have pretty much had to lean into it and turn publicly sniping with men's rights trolls into part of the film's marketing, and watching it all play out has revealed a curious truth to me. Whereas I and plenty of other people could have told you this was going to happen the moment the remake and the cast were announced, I feel like at least half the pop culture watching world doesn't really see what the big deal is, period. As a matter of fact, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with friends and colleagues where the overriding question for them is, what's the big deal? When did fucking Ghostbusters become sacred? A response that baffles me and I'm sure a lot of my audience. See, from where I'm at, Ghostbusters has always been this huge, looming, big deal, so it never really occurred to me that for plenty of other folks, it's just another popular 80s comedy, no different than if someone had decided to remake some disposable property like Police Academy or Revenge of the Nerds. Now, frankly, I'd counter that remake or not, the original Ghostbusters, just as an individual film on its own, absent anything else, is a singular great classic film. Remember, I'm the guy who spent almost 40 minutes explaining why, but it is interesting to me that such an extreme divide exists. I mean, there's always differing opinions, but Star Wars level generational classic versus just another 80s movie, whatever, is a pretty goddamn big split, and one that I think might go a ways into explaining why the reactions got so out of hand regarding this remake. I mean, apart from the guys who were just pissed off that they recast it with women, those assholes were gonna act up no matter what, and I guess also apart from the fact that yes, things like unconscious sexism, racism, whatever, are often a factor because society we're all marinating in is itself racist and sexist, so it can end up sneaking into the background of even the best of our thinking, even if you're not super aware of it. I mean, that's what that whole song from Avenue Q was about, remember? But anyway, looking beyond the vocal but lesser minority of genuine out and proud misogynists, I really do feel like most of the fans objecting so strongly to the basic idea of a remake feel this way in large part because a flat-out remake definitively closes the book on the idea of sequels, legacy, or any other kind of continuation to the mythos of the original film and the characters. Granted, a lot of this has been clumsily expressed so as to either be opportunistically claimed by or erroneously lumped in with the genuine He-Man Woman Haters Club bullshit, thus becoming an object lesson and looking both ways before you run out into the middle of a stupid internet culture war, but whatever. Just like I said, I feel the initial wave of hating the idea of a remake as opposed to just a gender-flipped remake was coming from the same fairly reasonable place as my own ongoing skepticism. Disappointment at driving the final nail into the coffin for the idea of the original Ghostbusters as an ongoing story, or, in modern parlance, a franchise. And I think that immediate gut reaction ties into the aforementioned split when it comes to viewing the original film. See, here's the thing. While some of the so-called Generation X classics like Star Wars, Raiders, etc. tend to have registered as such no matter when you first came to them, others seem to be tied pretty strongly to age. And when it comes to Ghostbusters, it seems like if you saw this movie in its original release when you were already heading into your teens or older, well, even if you recognized it as a great film, it's still, just another great high-concept comedy in a great era for high-concept comedy. So it was another movie that maybe wound up on your shelf next to Caddyshack, Blues Brothers, Animal House, Vacation, etc. But if you were my age or younger and you fell in love with Ghostbusters as a little kid, there's a good chance you embraced it in an entirely different way. For a lot of people, Ghostbusters very quickly and very definitively morphed into much more than one great movie you loved. It was your lunchbox, your favorite juice, your toys, your fucking breakfast, and a cartoon you maybe watched for years. In other words, even though in reality it was an example of a big movie whose ancillary merchandising ended up having a way longer shelf life than anybody had planned, to a big slice of a whole generation, it really felt like Ghostbusters was one of those broad, continuing franchises like Star Wars or the Marvel and DC Comics universes. Something with mythos and lore, even though the movie itself is largely premised on making fun of the idea of big, elaborate Lovecraftian supernatural mythology. And even though you kinda knew that genuinely interesting world-building stuff that came up in the animating series like Slimer becoming a good guy, or Sam Hain, or the Boogeyman, or the Sandman, etc., was never gonna make it into the movies. In fact, when they did finally make a sequel, it should have been depressingly crystal clear that even though everything from the blueprint for expanding the premise laid out by the cartoons and the conjurings of our own imaginations had sold a generation on the idea of Ghostbusters as an expansive franchise, the people actually making the core Ghostbusters product did not really see it that way. Ghostbusters 2 lazily resets the premise and world building back to zero to tell the same story over again without even significantly growing any of the characters, basically making it the Independence Day resurgence of its time. So it's not too unreasonable to ask, ask, I think, is there really a franchise to be mourned here? Was there ever really an opportunity that was lost? Or are we looking at a great movie and a pretty good spin-off cartoon and extrapolating the loss of some grander mythos that was never really in the design? Hey, nostalgia is a powerful thing, especially when tied to an original movie that actually is one of the best examples of its genre ever produced. And that plus Dan Aykroyd, God love him, essentially keeping himself in the public eye for almost 3 decades since with a semi-annual tease of Ghostbusters 3 has helped keep that perhaps misguided hope alive. And look, as someone who was there then and today is still kind of pissed that I'll never see Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4, I get it. I completely get it. But really, it becomes important to ask what we were hoping for. Ghostbusters 2 demonstrated that pretty much nobody involved really seemed to care about taking things in new directions, so did we really want to see an increasingly aging cast go through the same variations on that theme again? Or even some half-hearted age of franchising attempt to tie Gozer and Vigo the Carpathian together? Yeah, Extreme Ghostbusters was about 100 times better than that title would suggest, but did you really want to see a movie of that with, in all likelihood, a bunch of fucking Disney Channel actors? Would anyone have been truly edified by the prospect of Ray and whoever else turned up for the cameo, quote-unquote, passing the torch to like Michael Cera or Jonah Hill or Ashton Kutcher or Ed Helms or fucking Borat as a now grown-up baby Oscar, which I'm about 90% certain was the plan at least at one point? That one video game basically was Ghostbusters 3, and while it was fine, would you really want to watch it without the gameplay? Would that have been worth 30 years of waiting? Look, sometimes narrative entertainment doesn't end up where you want it to. We've all got a book that we wish had one more chapter, a comic we wish had one more issue, a game we wish had one more level, a show we wish had one more episode. It happens. And yeah, sometimes we get our wish. I mean, whoever thought we'd get Mad Max back, or that Rocky would come back to life twice? On the other hand, ask anyone who was big into the X-Files. Enough said. Bottom line, this is not about trying to make the new Ghostbusters look better by deconstructing the original. Fuck that noise. Ghostbusters is an all-time classic, and no remake is going to change that one way or the other. There's a lot of reasons to be against remakes of classic movies, and this remake in particular, its own less than impressive marketing materials, for example, but maybe it's not really fair to make it a punching bag for the hypothetical loss of something that was probably never going to exist. If this new movie sucks, it's going to suck for the same reason anything else sucks, not because some other imaginary movie didn't happen.